Welcome back to Women of Worth, the podcast where we explore personal growth, mental well-being, and thriving in every aspect of life. Today, we're talking about something that impacts all of our relationships, whether at home, work, or with ourselves: emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a powerful skill that helps you recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. It's key to building stronger connections, improving communication, and enhancing your mental health. In today's episode, we'll dive into what emotional intelligence really is, why it matters, and the unique challenges women face in developing it. We'll also walk through practical steps you can take to strengthen your emotional intelligence and share real-life examples of how these strategies can transform your relationships and career. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more episodes every week. And if you know someone who could benefit from developing their emotional intelligence, share this episode with them, because growth is something we can all achieve together. Now, let's get into it. Here's everything you need to know about emotional intelligence and how to start developing it today.
Welcome to our deep dive into emotional intelligence, or EI for short. I know a lot of you have been asking to explore this topic, and honestly, I'm pretty excited to dig into it myself.
Well, it seems like everyone's talking about emotional intelligence these days, but I think a lot of people don't really know what it is or why it's such a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe we should start there. What is EI really all about?
I think the most fascinating thing about emotional intelligence is that it's not just about, being touchy-feely. It's really a set of skills that can help you understand and manage emotions, not just your own, but those of others. It's like navigating this complex world of feelings with, intelligence.
Okay, so We've heard this term emotional intelligence, but it sounds like it's more than just one thing. Is that right?
Absolutely. There are 4 key components to EI. Self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and social skills. And it's really the interplay of all these components that makes EI so powerful.
Gotcha. So it's like all these different pieces working together, like ingredients in a recipe.
I love that analogy. So let's start with the foundation, which is self-awareness.
Self-awareness, okay.
And this is all about understanding your own emotions, what triggers you, how you typically react, your strengths, weaknesses, all of that.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like looking in a mirror, but for your emotions.
Yeah, precisely. Being able to recognize and name your emotions as they're happening. For example, noticing that you get anxious before presentations, or that certain people they push your buttons.
Right. I can definitely relate to that. But just knowing what you're feeling, is that enough?
Well, that's where self-regulation comes in. This is the ability to manage those emotions, especially when you're under pressure.
Okay, so you don't just lose it.
Exactly. You don't want to be reacting impulsively all the time, in ways that you might regret later.
Yeah. So it's like having a pause button.
Yeah.
Before you maybe send that angry email.
Exactly. It's not about suppressing your emotions. It's about learning how to channel them in a healthy and productive way.
Gotcha. So self-awareness is knowing what's going on inside.
Right.
And self-regulation is being able to manage it all.
You got it.
Okay, so what's next?
Next up is empathy. This is all about understanding other people's emotions, being able to see things from their perspective.
So like putting yourself in their shoes.
I love that, yeah.
Yeah.
It's crucial for building strong, healthy relationships because it allows you to communicate better, resolve conflicts peacefully, really build that trust and rapport.
I see. So if self-awareness is knowing yourself, then empathy is knowing others.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay, so we got 3 down. What's the 4th one?
The 4th component is social skills. This is how we bring all the other components together, using your self-awareness, your self-regulation, and your empathy to communicate well, build relationships, and navigate, all those social situations.
So it's not just about being like the life of the party.
Right.
It's about using your emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
To make real connections.
Yes, exactly. Social skills involve things like active listening, nonverbal communication, conflict resolution, really just building rapport with people.
Okay, so we've got a good handle on what EI is.
Yeah.
But, why should we care? Why is this all so important?
Well, as we've been talking about, emotional intelligence has a huge impact on pretty much every aspect of your life.
Okay, let's break that down. Let's start with relationships. How does EI affect our relationships with partners, friends, family?
Well, think about it. When you're self-aware, You're more in tune with your own needs and boundaries, which makes it much easier to communicate them to your partner.
Right.
And if you're good at self-regulation, you're less likely to overreact, which can help prevent arguments.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we all had those fights that just blew up out of nowhere. And later you think, why did I even get so upset?
Exactly. And then empathy. Empathy is essential for really understanding your partner's perspective and responding with compassion.
So it's not just about avoiding fights. It's about creating a deeper connection. Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about our careers? Does EI really matter in the workplace?
There's more than you might think. Studies have actually shown that emotional intelligence is a better predictor of job performance than IQ.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
So it's not just about how smart you are.
Nope. It's about how you manage yourself and how you interact with others.
I see.
Leaders with high EI are better at motivating their teams, building trust, and making good decisions, which ultimately leads to better results for everyone.
So it's like those amazing bosses we hear about, they just have high EI.
It's definitely a big factor.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got relationships and careers. What about our mental health? How does EI affect our overall well-being?
Well, when you're self-aware, you're better able to recognize and manage stress, as well as other difficult emotions.
So it's like having the tools to cope with those feelings.
Exactly. Self-regulation helps you avoid unhealthy coping mechanisms, things like substance abuse or emotional eating.
Oh, that's important. And what about empathy? How does that play into mental health?
Well, empathy helps you connect with others and build those supportive relationships, which is so essential for our well-being.
So it's like you're not facing those challenges alone.
Exactly.
This is all amazing stuff.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's not always easy to develop these skills, especially for women. There must be some unique challenges there, right?
You're absolutely right. Women often face unique challenges when it comes to developing their EI.
We were talking about all those incredible benefits of high EI, and it really seems like a superpower for life. But you also mentioned some unique challenges for women, like what are we talking about here?
Yeah, women often encounter some pretty specific hurdles when it comes to EI.
Okay, like what?
Well, societal expectations and gender norms can create a tricky landscape.
Oh, I bet. So the research mentions things like societal expectations, balancing emotions at work, and even something called empathy overload. Those sound intense.
Yeah, they can be. Let's start with societal expectations. Women are often expected to be the caregivers, the nurturers, the ones who are always attuned to everyone else's needs.
Right. It's like, be sensitive, be caring, be supportive. That's the message girls often get from a young age.
Exactly. And that can lead to women neglecting their own emotional needs, which can cause exhaustion, resentment, even burnout.
Wow, that's a lot to carry. You're always putting others first. I'm looking at the research here, and there's a story about Sarah. She's a project manager. And she felt this constant pressure to suppress her emotions at work, especially frustration or disappointment, because she didn't want to be seen as too emotional or unprofessional.
That's a classic example of this double bind women face. They're expected to be emotionally aware and supportive, but not too emotional. It's a tough balancing act.
It sounds exhausting, like always walking on eggshells. So is that what leads to that next challenge? Balancing emotions and professionalism?
Exactly. There's often this double standard where expressing emotions at work is seen as a weakness for women. But for men, it might be seen as a strength. If a woman expresses anger, she might be labeled difficult or out of control. But a man doing the same thing, he's assertive or passionate.
That's so frustrating. So women can't win. If they show too much emotion, they're unprofessional.
Yeah.
But if they keep it all bottled up, then they might seem cold or uncaring.
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure.
No kidding. So with all this pressure to manage emotions, does that lead to the next challenge? Perfectionism and self-criticism.
It definitely plays a role.
Okay, I can relate to that one.
Well,
But how does perfectionism tie into EI?
Well, when you're striving for perfection, you're often focused on meeting those external standards, rather than tuning into your own authentic feelings.
Oh, I see.
You might criticize yourself for having certain emotions instead of just acknowledging and accepting them.
Right. Instead of saying, I'm feeling stressed, it becomes, I shouldn't be feeling stressed. I should have this under control. It's like you're just piling on more pressure.
And in the research, there's an example of Emma. She was so focused on meeting these unrealistic standards that she ignored her own feelings of stress and overwhelm, which eventually led to burnout.
That's a good point. It's like she was running on empty. Okay, and then there's that last challenge we talked about, empathy overload. I have to admit, I'm a little confused by this one. Isn't empathy supposed to be a good thing?
It absolutely is. It's essential for healthy relationships and strong EI, but it can become a problem when you're constantly absorbing other people's emotions without setting any boundaries.
So you're like an emotional sponge, taking on everyone's stress and negativity.
Yeah, and women are often expected to be those emotional fixers for their families, workplaces, communities. But without boundaries, it can be incredibly draining.
It makes sense why it would lead to overload. So the research talks about Maria. She's a healthcare worker. And she'd always feel so depleted after work.
Yeah, classic case of compassion fatigue. It's really common in caregiving professions.
Wow. But it sounds like it can happen anywhere if you're around people who are struggling.
Absolutely.
So it's not about being selfish. It's about recognizing that you can't pour from an empty cup.
Well said.
Okay, so we've outlined these challenges, but how do we actually overcome them? How do we develop our EI in a healthy way?
Well, the good news is emotional intelligence is a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned and strengthened.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, it's not something you're born with. It's something you cultivate through practice.
Okay, so it's not about being naturally emotionally intelligent.
Right.
It's about putting in the work.
Exactly.
So even with these challenges, there are solutions.
There are, and we'll get into those next.
Okay, I'm ready for some solutions. What can women do to boost their EI?
Well, let's start with self-awareness. It's the foundation of everything. It's about being able to recognize your emotions and understanding why you're feeling them.
Okay, so you're like an emotional detective.
But how do you actually do that?
There are lots of tools. Journaling, for example.
Journaling.
Yeah, it can help you track your emotions and identify those triggers.
Oh, so you're basically keeping a diary of your feelings.
Pretty much. You don't have to write a novel.
Yeah.
Even a few minutes each day can be helpful.
So, like, just jotting down some notes.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound too bad. So, the research mentions Lisa.
Right.
She started journaling every morning. And she was able to identify what was causing her stress.
Exactly. And then she could develop strategies to manage it better.
That's amazing. Okay, so journaling. Any other tips for building self-awareness?
Mindfulness is another powerful tool. Paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Mindfulness, okay.
It's about observing your thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them.
So like taking a step back.
Exactly.
That sounds challenging.
It takes practice, but there are lots of ways to do it, from formal meditation to just being more present in your daily life.
Right, finding what works for you.
Okay, so once you have that self-awareness, what's next?
Then we can move on to self-regulation. Remember, this is about managing those emotions.
Right, the pause button.
Exactly.
Any practical tips for building that self-regulation muscle?
Definitely. One of the simplest and most effective is deep breathing.
Okay, I've heard about deep breathing, but how does it actually help?
When you take slow, deep breaths, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which calms your body and mind.
Oh, wow.
It's like hitting the reset button on your stress response.
I like that. A physiological trick.
Exactly.
The research talks about Emily. She learned to use deep breathing to stay calm when she was responding to difficult emails.
Yeah, and she found that by taking a few deep breaths, she could write more thoughtful responses.
That's great. Okay, what else? Any other techniques for self-regulation?
Another powerful one is cognitive reappraisal.
Cognitive reappraisal.
Yeah, it's about changing your perspective.
Oh, okay.
So imagine you're stuck in traffic and you feel your anger rising. Instead of fuming about it, you could reappraise the situation. Maybe think, this is a chance to listen to that podcast I've been wanting to hear.
Oh, I see. So you're finding the silver lining.
Exactly.
Okay, this is great stuff. And ready to tackle the last two pieces of the EI puzzle. Empathy and social skills.
Those are big ones.
And especially after our discussion about empathy overload, I'm curious, how do we cultivate empathy without getting totally overwhelmed?
Right. It's about finding that balance. And a big part of that is active listening.
Active listening.
Yeah, it's about really tuning in to what the other person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to talk.
So you're not just hearing the words.
Right. You're paying attention to their tone, their body language, really trying to understand their perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you do that without taking on their emotions?
Boundaries are key. You don't have to fix their problems or absorb their negativity. You can be supportive and understanding without getting completely swept up in their emotions.
I see. So it's like offering a hand, but not letting them pull you under.
Exactly.
The research mentions Michelle. She learned to prioritize self-care after a long day of working with clients to avoid feeling drained.
Yeah, it's so important to replenish your own emotional reserves.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got empathy. Now, what about social skills? How do we strengthen those?
Well, social skills are really about putting all the other EI components into practice. Using your self-awareness, your self-regulation, your empathy to communicate effectively and build those strong connections.
So it's more than just being outgoing.
It's about using your emotional intelligence to create positive interactions.
Okay, and what are some specific skills we can work on?
Assertive communication is a big one.
Assertive communication.
Yeah, it's about expressing your needs and boundaries clearly, but respectfully, without being aggressive or passive.
Oh, okay. That sounds like a tough balance to strike.
It can be, especially in conflict situations.
Right.
One tip is to use I statements.
I statements.
Yeah, like instead of saying, "You always make me feel stressed," you could say, "I feel overwhelmed when deadlines are unclear."
Oh, that's interesting. So you're taking ownership of your feelings.
Exactly.
The research talks about Maya. She found that using I statements helped her communicate with her team.
Yeah, it can really make a difference.
Okay, so assertive communication. What else?
Nonverbal communication is huge.
Oh, right. Our body language and tone of voice.
Exactly. They can sometimes speak louder than words.
So we need to be mindful of how we're presenting ourselves.
Definitely.
Wow. This has been an amazing deep dive into EI.
It really has.
We've learned so much, from defining emotional intelligence, to exploring its benefits, to understanding the challenges women face, and most importantly, discovering solutions for building our EI.
And remember, it's a journey.
It is. It's about continuous growth and practice,
Exactly.
being curious about our emotions, and learning to manage them effectively.
Well said.
So, to all our listeners out there, keep exploring your emotional intelligence, keep learning and growing, and remember, it's a superpower worth developing. And if this episode resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this with someone who might need to hear this message. Let's create a community of support where we can all empower each other to heal and grow and thrive. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.